My name is Morgan Angus, and I'm the artist at Ravengate Studios. I'm here going to be doing a brief artist demonstration and a little bit of a talk for the Annapolis Arts Alliance and Gallery 57 West, where you can see a lot of my work. I'm so glad you could join us. Now that I've repositioned my camera, you can much more easily see what my hands are going to be doing, which is really the important part. So I'm going to be starting off by pulling out a pre-weighed out and pre-measured up ball. This is about the size ball of clay that I use for making one of my medium-sized mugs. And I pulled all of these out and sectioned off the clay and banged them into the shape that I wanted them to be in to start off with, just to make this demonstration a little easier. This is a cone 6 porcelain. I buy this from a local distributor. I buy all of my clay pre-mixed instead of mixing my own because I just don't have the room in this space to do much more than keep up with my clay recycling. So it's much easier and more efficient for me to buy pre-mixed clay. So I'm going to be starting off by just getting this work centered. This is the basis for throwing anything pottery. So you've got to get your clay centered. Now I've got a bucket of water right here and I'm keeping my hands wet. Whenever I'm touching moving clay, I want the clay to slip through my hands instead of binding up. If I have any kind of resistance on my hands, that causes the clay to pull and fight, and it's just not helpful. So anytime I'm touching moving clay, I want my hands to be really slick. So you can tell by where the clay is on my hands where my pressure is. So I'm using this part of my hand here and this part of my hand here to push the clay up into my hand, pushing it up into a cone, and then I'm pushing it back down. And this helps get the clay aligned and properly primed to begin making my mug form. So I'm just going to do this a couple times, make sure that I have my piece all the way centered. Now, you'll see a lot of different people throw different ways. Many potters will put their hands on the insides of their knees. I have way too long arms to do that. So I keep mine in by my hips. Keeping your strength in your inner core gives you much more ability to keep control over your work. It gives you the strength to be able to hold your hands still, because you're really not trying to move the clay, you're trying to make the clay move with you. So now that I've got this kind of where I want it, I've got kind of the shape that I desire, I'm going to be dropping a hole in the bottom. So I've kind of decided where my middle point is. I can feel it as the clay goes around, and I know that it's right there. And I'm just going to push down with my thumb. And I've gone down just about as far as I want to go. I'm now going to use my hands and I'm going to be compressing the bottom a little bit. And I'm just going back and forth really gently on the bottom, all while pushing down, because I want that bottom of my pot to have as much strength and integrity as it possibly can. So I'm forcing the clay into as small a space as I can possibly manage to get it. And just for good measure, I'm also going to use a tool here just to reinforce that, just to really push down and give that pot a nice strong bottom. This one, I use this less to compress and more to just clean up the bottom and give it a nice surface. Now I'm going to be raising the walls. So I'm going to be using my fingers to pull the clay up into a cylindrical shape. So I'm using pressure, my hands are like this, and I'm using this hand less to pull up and more as a brace while I use this hand to pull the clay up. So they're going to be moving together, and as you'll be able to see in a moment, it's almost like a donut that's getting raised up and getting smaller as I go. So that's my first pull. But the walls are still a little bit thicker than I want it to be, and the pot is not as tall as I want it to be yet. So I can do it again. And I try not to take this too quickly. Now I've decided to use my knuckle just to give it a little bit of a smaller surface area. When I use all three of my fingers there, that's a lot more surface area, and that works really well for my first pull. But when I get into my later pulls, I like to use just the tip of my knuckle right there. And that gives me an opportunity to brace my two thumbs together so that when my hands move, they're moving in concert. And that's great. So now I'm just using at the end of each pull, I'm kind of using my finger, and the webbing of my finger right there, to smooth that edge out, because we really want the drinking surface of this pot to be smooth and comfortable. This is just a little bit of a raise. You can see the donut of clay come up each time I do that. And then I finish off that rim there. Now it looks like this is going to be a fairly small mug. You have to remember that clay shrinks. So whatever this is, it's going to be smaller when it's finished. And I like to have my pots have a little bit of character. I think we'll just do some basic throwing lines in this one. So that's a fairly nice size and shape that'll be nice to add a handle to. I may not add a handle to this exact one, but we'll get there later on in the day. So this last step here before I cut it off the wheel is I'm getting all of the water out of the bottom of the pot with this sponge. If water sits in the bottom of the pot, it's going to dissolve that nice firm base that I put in the bottom, and it's going to make it softer than the rest of the pot, and then it won't dry out correctly, and I have the potential of getting really nasty cracks. So now I'm going to cut this off the bottom here, and I'm going to make sure that my hands are really clean and dry, or as clean and dry as they're going to get in here before I pick up the outside of this pot. And once again, I'm really supporting it. I'm not gripping it. I'm just kind of gently holding it. And I can move that aside. So I'm going to probably spend another half hour to 45 minutes throwing. I will get back to the video a little bit later when our demonstration pot is firm enough to put a handle on and firm enough to do my foot alterations. Thanks. While we're waiting for the next step in our pot, we can talk about clay recycling. All of the scraps of pots and failed pots and anything that I am doing that is still unfired clay can get put into these two buckets. This is a 7-gallon bucket, that's a 5-gallon bucket. Combined with water and then mixed with this hammer drill and a paint mixer to reintegrate it into a smooth consistency, which is laid out on this 25-pound plaster slab. Once it's laid out on the slab, the moisture gets removed by soaking into the plaster slab until it's no longer this almost liquid consistency anymore, and it turns into a moldable, movable piece of clay that can be wedged into usable clay once again. This is one-handed wedging. So this is my recycled clay. I have pulled this off of a plaster slab and wedged it, and I will just continue to do so. Typically I'd wedge on that same plaster slab because I break these tasks up into multiple days so that I have the plaster slab free for things. You end up having to find ways to make your studio multi-use when you don't have a lot of space in your studio. So this clay that I'm wedging up here will end up being one of the next pieces that I throw. Or maybe it'll be the handle for the piece that I already threw today. And it's just the best to be able to make the most out of all of my material. So we're back over here at my work table, away from my wheel. This is the other side, the other view from my studio. I have pots behind me that are in need of a little attention before they can be finished. And this right here is the pot that we threw earlier. And this is just a tub of hot water. It's hot because I like my hands to be in something warm, especially in this weather. This is the chunk of clay that I'm going to turn into a handle for this. But before I do that, you may notice that all of my pieces have a bottom that sits a little bit differently. Right now you've got a fairly normal bottom. And how I get this, so first off I like to kind of go around this rim. I want to make sure that there's no sharp points because those get even harder to handle once I've altered this bottom. I don't trim my pieces. There's no trimming in any of my work. What I do is I alter my feet just here with my thumb. So I'm turning and I'm using the surface of my thumb to change how the bottom sits. And then I want to set this down on the table and make sure that it's not going to rock. So now I have my ruffle on the bottom. I've changed that exactly the way I want it to. Now I'm going to take this piece of clay here. I want this to be tapered. It's probably more clay than I need, but it gives me something really substantial to hold on to up here. Now that I've got this tapered shape here, I'm going to dip my hand in the water, and just like when I was throwing, I'm using that water to slip my hand down the handle. And the more I do it, it's almost like a milking motion. The more I do that, the longer this handle gets. So once again, if you look at my hand, you can see where the clay is sitting, and that's all of the surface points where my hand has touched. So I keep going for a little bit. I like my handles to have a little bit of a groove in them. And what I'm doing is I'm taking this point in my thumb and I'm making a bend in my thumb, and I'm putting my thumb right there in that handle. And when I pull down, it's pulling that handle right in that shape. So now that I've gotten this handle the way I want it to, I know that I can get what I need out of it. I can lay it down, and I'm going to cut it off of that big chunk of clay that I've made here, that I hold it onto, and I'm going to be using a needle tool. Now, these things look really simple, and they are really simple, and they're the best knife you can get in clay. It's just almost like cutting cheese with a wire. Now, because this handle is a lot longer than I needed to, I actually left a good chunk of my handle up here. Now, if I were in production mode right now, making a whole bunch of things, I'd be able to pull my next handle out of this. But for right now, this will just go back into my bucket to reuse at a later date. So now I have this handle here. Now, I can't just stick the clay on. I have to treat the surface a little bit before I can get it to attach. So I'm going to be using the needle tool again, and I'm going to score the surface. You can get really aggressive with this, but I found that I like to go in one direction, then go on the diagonal, then go on the other diagonal. Then I put a drop of water on it. So this integrates the clay together. It makes sure that the two pieces of clay don't slip past each other on a surface of water, like my hands were slipping past the clay, but gives it a surface for it to really adhere and stick to itself. So I have to do this on both attachment points. Now I'm just using gentle pressure here. Now, I also want it attached on the bottom. You know, a good handle should be attached firmly. Just a small attachment point should do it just fine. Now I should see where I want that handle to sit. I think I'll make this one of the elf ear cups that I've been doing. So now I'm just kind of pulling this handle up the side so that I can make sure that I have my other side of the handle all the way. Now on my elf ear cups, I leave a lot more of the handle than I really need to. And I always like to have a little bit of a curly cue, so curl this bottom up. Now I can take this at this point, give it a nice pinch, and that both gives a nice place to put your thumb, and it gives a nice aesthetic. So I'm just smoothing with my finger to make sure that attachment point is as firm as I can make it. So there is our simple mug with a fairy ear handle. Thanks so much for checking in with me. I hope that you have a great holiday season. Thanks for sticking with me as one of December's featured artists at Gallery 57 West for the Annapolis Arts Alliance. I'm Morgan Angus, and this is Raving Gate Studios. Thank you.